Hi, Little Justice Leaders. I am so excited for the conversation we are about to have today. In case you don't know me, I'm Shelby. I'm the creator of Little Justice Leaders. At Little Justice Leaders, we help schools, educators, and families talk to kids about important topics of social justice. So if you care about education and social justice, you are in the right place and you are really going to enjoy the conversation we're having today. We have a very special guest with us, Marquan Jones. And Marquan is an educator, a researcher, and an expert in all things education and social justice. He spent his entire career in education as a teacher, an assistant principal, and coaching teachers. So for the past 5 years, he's also been a tutor and a consultant to private clients and local schools. Marquan is currently pursuing a PhD in urban schooling with a specialization in learning and development at Cleveland State University. And his research, which we'll talk about a little bit today, focuses on youth participatory action research. He also has a BA in psychology and a master's of education. Welcome, Marquan. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about this conversation.
Me too. I'm so
Mhm.
excited to get into it. So can you start by just telling us a little bit about yourself, maybe like your teaching experience, your education
Yep.
experience, how
Mhm.
you got into education?
Yep. So I actually sort of fell into education on some level. So I went to Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia, where I majored in psychology. And I didn't want to go to grad school right away. And so throughout my time at Morehouse, I was a Bonner Scholar, which was a community service-based scholarship. So I spent a lot of times in schools, in varying capacities, tutoring kids after school, going on trips with kids in different community organizations and whatnot. So by the time when it was time to graduate, I didn't want to go right into grad school. So I'd say, well, since I'm doing all this tutoring, I might as well teach. And I applied to Teach for America. I got rejected from Teach for America. And, in that rejection email, they say, hey, here are some like-minded programs. And so I ended up doing an AmeriCorps program in Boston, which also had a teacher training aspect to it. And so from then on, it's been all in education. But, so I sort of fell into it in some ways, but, I'm very glad that that's where I ended up.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like Teach for America really missed out.
Yeah. Thank
They truly
you.
missed the mark on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that context. I actually have a similar story where like I majored in psychology in undergrad. I
Oh,
kind of wanted to go to grad school, but wasn't going to go right away.
yep.
I had been spending a lot of time in schools through like volunteer projects and just landed in education
Yeah.
and found
Very
that I
similar.
loved it. Yeah,
Yeah.
so super
That's cool.
similar
Yeah.
story. Absolutely. So you are working on your PhD now.
Yep.
And you're working on youth participatory action research.
Mhm.
So, can you start by telling us what that is so we have some
Yep.
context?
So youth participatory action research is both a framework and a methodology, right? It's this idea where, the youth voices, youth problems, youth issues are sort of centralized and they are co-researchers. So it's not a hierarchy in terms of the adults in the building telling the students what to do. It's really a collaborative sort of environment where students and we sort of identify the problems that are important to them, figure out systematic ways to explore that problem, observe that problem, measure that problem, study that problem, and in that process, they become the experts on that problem and can then turn around and make recommendations from that position of being the expert, even though they're the youth. So, which is really cool. It's really what I love about YPAR.
Yeah, no, that's amazing.
Yep.
And can you tell me, like, in your words, in your mind, like how YPAR is connected to social justice?
Yep. So I think so. YPAR is very, very closely related to social. YPAR is social justice because, like I said, the youth are critically sort of analyzing their environment, their lived experience, the things that are really bothering them, right? And so whatever that issue is, and we can talk more as we go about some of the YPAR projects that I've sort of worked on with youth, but whatever that issue is for them, whether it's bullying in their schools, whether it's, lack of, safety, sidewalks in their neighborhood, like whatever it is, that they feel passionate about, then they are then through the YPAR cycle are empowered to address that issue and ultimately hopefully make change with regard to that issue. So I think it is the very definition of social justice for me.
I love that. I love that. YPAR is social justice. It
Yeah.
is, practicing YPAR is an act of justice. You mentioned examples. I think it might be really helpful for folks to hear, like, what does this look like in the classroom?
Yeah.
What kind
That's
of projects have you seen?
Yep. So I'm very fortunate to have for the past 2 years through my graduate assistantship at CSU, I've worked at Campus International High School where the YPAR process is embedded in the curriculum. So all of the ninth graders in their, we call it IB Core 9 class do YPAR. We just had our 8th annual campus conference where at CSU, where they then make poster presentations and other types of presentations on their findings and their recommendations and things like that. And so we have this past, so my first year doing it was my very first year, even just experiencing YPAR in general. The projects were broad. Students were interested in gun violence in their neighborhood. They were interested in some transportation issues that they experienced. To what degree are cars running red lights in their neighborhood, right? And so they were like, whatever problem they sort of experienced and wanted to study, that's what we studied. This past year, we wanted to sort of centralize it more to their school building. And so students did projects on the conditions of the girls' bathroom, bullying in school, drug use in school, mental health in school, and to what degree do students have access to it, and to what degree do students know what services are available and things like that. And so all of our projects in this past year were specifically centered around the issues that they experience in their school building.
I love that, and I love that it puts, students in the driver's seat to decide what's important to them,
Yep.
which, like you said, that is justice, right? Like,
Yep.
bringing young people's voices forward. You're talking about, high school students, early high school
Hmm.
students. Most of our community is elementary, some middle. And I know sometimes folks will hear things like this and they'll think, well, that works for high school, but that wouldn't work for elementary school. You're the expert here. Tell us, like,
Yeah.
can we do this at the elementary school level?
Oh, 1000%. And I think the main component of YPAR is it centralizes their experiences and their voices. And so just like our high school students have had particular issues, like I said, with around bullying or drug use in school and things like that, at every level from kindergarten up, there are things that are not maybe sitting right with them, or things that may feel them uncomfortable or they feel uncomfortable about. And it's really just YPAR is about creating the space where we can sort of talk about those things, right? What are you unhappy about? What are you dissatisfied about? What keeps you up at night? What makes you sad? And then really just from there, designing and looking at the particular problems and studying that problem and finding solutions and making recommendations to that problem. So even in elementary school, even in middle school, that dynamic exists. And YPAR really just gives the space to allow students to sort of voice their issues. And then now let's be proactive about sort of how we study this and fixing this issue.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah.
love that. And I love that it, assumed, like you said, even from starting at kindergarten, the young people come with experiences, with knowledge,
Yep.
with awareness of the world,
Yep.
which is so rooted, obviously, in injustice and in
Hmm.
injustice, and thinking of, young people not as empty vessels of that we're, filling with knowledge, but as, people with
Yep.
complex experiences and ideas and thoughts that are valuable.
Absolutely.
A lot of your passion is coming through and talking about YPAR,
Yeah.
but would love to hear, like, what got you interested? Why did you decide you wanted to do kind of YPAR as your
Yeah,
focus?
that's a really good question. So I just like with teaching, I sort of fell into YPAR, and I feel like it's the universe just sort of doing what the universe does and ultimately helping us end up where we need to end up, right? And so when I, applied to CSU and I was looking for graduate assistantships, I applied to three that I got denied for. There were things like, one was in a position in the financial aid office, one was, in other, sort of offices like that in the school, which I ultimately got denied for. There were very little spots and and a lot of people who needed them. And then, so after that third denial, I got a call from one of my mentors, Dr. Buckley, who said, "Hey, I'm working on YPAR, right?" And she explained what YPAR was to me, and in that conversation, it's just like a light bulb went off, and it's like, wow, like I've been doing versions of this throughout my entire career, right, as a school teacher and even as an assistant principal. And I was like, oh, I didn't know what that was. And so it's sort of from there, it's been all just fantastic, just experiencing on YPAR, presenting on YPAR, teaching YPAR. So this last year was the first year that I actually taught YPAR through my graduate assistantship. My first year, I was more so like the facilitator of the teachers. Like I said, it's embedded in the curriculum, right, at campus. So I was just sort of facilitating and making sure that all the teachers were sort of on the same page, had access to materials and things like that. Through the universe doing what it does, I had to, one of the teachers at the beginning of the year had a family emergency. And so somebody needed to teach that class. And I was like, all right, it's me. So I'm glad it was my second year that I, was physically doing it myself because I already got to see about it, the previous year. But yeah, so ever since then, I've been sort of really in love with YPAR and in love with how it empowers students because that empowering students piece is sort of at the core of my philosophy as a teacher and why I said, even though I didn't know what YPAR was, there were elements of it that I definitely infused throughout my time as a classroom teacher because empowering students is something that was very important to me.
Absolutely. So on that note, how did you bring justice and social justice into your classroom as a teacher or as into your school as a school leader?
So I worked at a charter school in New York, and in the charter environment in the Northeast is very, very intense in terms of a uniform discipline system. We had uniforms. If you don't have the right color socks on, there's an infraction. There's all these things. I really loved that we were all swimming in the same direction in terms of the discipline system, but there was a very big difference between the teachers who just applied the discipline system sort of robotically and what I tried to do in terms of use a discipline system as a guide, but also understand that there are nuances and things like that. So I'll give you an example. If the student had their head down, I give them a direction, sit up. If they don't sit up, then a demerit is supposed to follow sort of right after that. And if you get three demerits, you get sent out of class. And, for me, if the student didn't respond the first time, instead of just saying sit up again and knowing that they're going to get the demerit and probably want to go get sent out anyway, I will be the one to kneel down next to them, sort of talk to them, figure out what's going on. Because at that point, it's less about, using the discipline system just to use it and more about how can I, reach them to keep them in because I want them in the classroom, right? Like that's the goal. I want them there to learn. And so at that moment, they're telling me with this nonverbal of not following that direction that something is going on. And so, at that point, my desire was to sort of figure out how I can, figure out what's going on and help whatever that issue is. Maybe it's I'm tired. Okay, well then just stand up in the back. Do you need take a 2-minute walk to get some water? Like whatever it is could come out of that conversation, which I've experienced many teachers who sort of robotically use it, and it doesn't allow for students to sort of be human and you to sort of engage with them on that personal level to show them that you care genuinely, right? It's not just about sit up because I said sit up. It's like I need you to learn, and if something's impeding that, you from doing that, let's figure out what that is together so that we can fix it together so that you can ultimately learn because that's what I want. Yeah.
Absolutely. And what I love about this is like kind of just the through line of treating kids as human beings, right?
Yep.
Like we see that in the YPAR of like, they have dreams, they have ideas, they have
Mhm.
things that they're interested in, things that they
Yeah.
notice about the world. And they have feelings, they have emotions, they have bad days.
100%.
And just recognizing that they are human beings and
Yep.
treating them with that in mind, treating them with kindness, with care, with interest,
100%.
right?
Yeah.
Interest in who they are, what they're interested in,
Mhm.
what they're going through. I love that that's
Yeah.
just kind of the through line.
Yeah, and I found that once someone knows that you genuinely care about them and their
Mhm.
well-being, then you can push them to the highest of heights. But without that, understanding like that this person is in my corner, then that's really, really difficult to try
Yeah,
to get, some adults and kids, right?
right.
If they think that person is just sort of doing a job or, doesn't really care about them.
So true, so true. So it's like connection first. And okay, so there are a lot of teachers out here who, want to be involved with justice work. They want to be a social justice teacher, but they're not quite sure where to start. Do you have any advice for folks who are just starting
I
out or
do.
maybe, yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
I do have some advice. So
Okay.
first, as we know that the majority of the teachers in America, are white females. And oftentimes, in a school system that might be 70, 80, 90% students of color. So my first suggestion would be don't be afraid to sort of interrogate your whiteness and ask and and look and see, do I have any sort of biases that are implicit or explicit within myself that may be contributing to how I'm responding to this student, right? Especially if it's a student who's of a different race than you. And then for everybody in general, just practice reflexivity, right? So I would constantly, whether that's journaling, it doesn't have to be journaling, but I would constantly play in my mind the interactions that I've had with students and ask myself, was there anything in my tone? Right? Like, is there anything that I could have done better, said better, that perhaps might not have set that student off? So I mentioned the example of the head down, but really there was a lot of trial and error when it comes to always thinking about like, what was my role in that interaction? And I think just being really open to analyzing that and reflecting on that within yourself. And then knowing that the next day is the next day, right? And so, regardless of how your interaction was with the student the previous day, I definitely recommend always going in the next day, like it's a new day. Start at a new slate and let's sort of figure it out versus holding that grudge or having some of those negative feelings from the day before. And then I think aside from that, the last thing I'll say on it is always sort of, check in. So always circle back, right, to students and ask them, right? Like it's talk to them. Like you mentioned, they have thoughts, feelings, experiences. Oftentimes I think many adults just sort of, tell students what to do or have opinions or thoughts in their mind about who a student is, or that's the problem child. I had an educator tell me as recently as this year that a student was never going to change, a student who was getting suspended and things like that. And then, and that student hasn't, that student has grown significantly. Like, they're ninth graders, right? All ninth, like by definition, they're going to change from September to, and that student presented their YPAR project. That student, wore a suit. That student was well spoken, respectful, and it's just, but throughout that process, like I definitely had to pull them out multiple times and had conversations with them, made clear, my expectations to them, and then was open and honest with them about the ways in which that they weren't following them and the ways that I know that they could follow them. And for me, just having that interaction, and you sort of mentioned this earlier about the personal connection, and we talked about, people know that you genuinely care about them, you can push them to the highest of heights. And so really being cognizant of that fact and trying to build it, right? Find out what they're interested in, ask what they're interested in. Check and say hello to them in the lunchroom. Like, go out of your way just to say, like, oh, I just came here for you. So how's your day going? You know what I mean? Little things like that, I think, really help sow the seeds of social justice or being able to sort of promote and encourage social justice within the student teacher's classroom.
Absolutely. I think that's so, I mean, again, just like coming back to that, like treating them as humans. And what I love about
Mhm.
this is that we all know how to do that, right? Like we
Yeah,
all do that with other adults in our lives.
exactly.
Sometimes it just takes like reprogramming to think about our students in that way.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, it's not, we don't have to learn a brand new skill. We don't have to like
Yep.
change everything we're doing. And what I also love is like, the first half of everything you were saying had nothing to do with what you actually do. It's
Hmm.
so much about yourself, right? Like
Yep.
reflecting
That's so
on your
important.
experiences, thinking
Hmm.
about what you've learned, thinking about what's happened, and considering your biases. Like what bias am I bringing into this space?
Yep.
Marquan said it really nicely. Like, do I have bias? If you're a white teacher, I'll tell you, you do have bias. So and no matter what state, like we're all on a journey. We're all
Yeah.
always learning and unlearning for all of us. And
Yep.
so, thinking about what stage am I at? Like, how can I push myself further? How can I learn and unlearn more? So
Yeah.
anyways, I just love that it's really not always about exactly what you do in the class. I
Mhm.
think is what we always fear of, like, what do I do? How do
Yep.
but it's really
Mhm.
more about like, are you reflecting? Are you thinking? Are
Yep.
you taking time to ask yourself the hard question? And then maybe rewiring
Yeah.
how you think about the students, even, which is how you're
Yep.
going to show up and treat them. So a
A
lot of
hundred
just
percent.
rewiring ourselves.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
for me, it's definitely a mindset thing. I'm so glad you
Yeah.
mentioned that because if, a teacher has a desire to, have a social justice sort of oriented, experience in their classroom, then that is absolutely the first step. And that already qualifies that teacher to be able to execute that well, right? And so in terms of the what you do piece, like I said, everything is filtered through that sort of mindset of everything you said about
Yes.
sort of interrogating your whiteness, interrogating your
Mhm.
biases, even if you're not, why, whatever it is, if you, how you grew up, there are different things that are sort of programmed within us that
Right.
can come out in very real ways. And it's really just, as long as we sort of reflect on that and think about how we feel, think about, how we felt, how we want to feel, think about
Yeah.
what goals we want, what we want our classroom to look at. So that
Right.
classroom that I mentioned that I took over this year, it was very, very hostile, for lack of a better word, when I
Mhm.
first took it over.
Yeah.
This was mid-September. There really weren't any expectations, and educators know that that first month or two of class is very
Yeah.
important in
Mhm.
terms of establishing rules and expectations. And so, me coming in, like it even though I've been in education 14, 15 years at this point,
Yeah.
it was, it took some work to
Hmm.
sort of get them to trust me, get them to know that I'm serious about my expectations. And so as I'm talking, the other piece is consistency is really important, right?
Yeah.
And so consistency and transparency in terms of these are my expectations. This is what I'm going to hold you to every single time, and I'm not going to let it slide because then that just communicates that I didn't really mean them as expectations in the first place. But also, I'm going to help you get there. And then just today, I went, and brought some donuts to that particular class because I either had to be there since the campus conference, and they were just really so happy to see me. Vibe was so different than what it was when I first took it over.
Yeah.
And the only reason that is the case is because they knew that I had their back and I showed them that at every single chance, every single opportunity, even when it, was in the context of a reprimand, right? I'm like, I'm telling you this because I know you can do better. And I want you to, and I know you want to do better because here are your goals. And here's how what you're doing is not helping you reach your goals. And just
Absolutely.
that constant message, that constant love,
Yeah.
showing that throughout can take you very, very far as
Absolutely.
an
And
educator.
that is such a beautiful note for us to end on. Marquan, thank you so much. Is there a way for
Thank
our
you.
community to find your work, support you?
Yeah, so I'm like I said, I'm in my third year of my program, so I don't have any work yet to
Okay.
to really speak about
Fair
the
enough.
process. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
We'll do a part two. We'll come back.
Yeah, I am a self-employed math tutor, which is what, I've been doing the most of, but I am in the process of, sort of writing and figuring out, exactly what my dissertation will be focused on, and I do plan on producing some stuff in the very near future.
Awesome. Okay. Well,
Yeah,
we will share that as it comes out. If you need a math
thank you.
tutor, you know who to go to.
Yep.
Marquand, thank you for this conversation. I
My
know I learned a
pleasure.
lot. It was so good to just really talk about humanity, talk about our students as people as
Thank
they
you.
are. For those of you who care about justice and education, please subscribe to our channel. If you are a school leader and want to bring social justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion into your school, I'll leave links below as to how you can get involved with our programming. If you're a teacher or a parent and you want to start doing this work with your kids or your students, we'll also put links below onto how you can get involved with the work. But Marquand, thank you so much.
Thank
And we
you so
will
much.
hopefully be back with a part two at
Yes,
some point.
ma'am.
All
Excellent. Have a
right.
great